Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you the steps to replace a through-hull fitting in a 2020 and newer Seadoo. I attempted to seal it from the inside and the outside with a permanent seal at like 5200, but what you'll see in the following video is that it didn't quite work out. Even though the sealant cured for several days, the excessive pressure from the jet thrust just peeled it away. The reason why it was leaking from the inside out is because I filled the ski with water to perform a leak test, and this was a primary leak. This ski was originally brought to me to repair some hull damage caused by a Jetski port, where the rollers punched through the hull. The engine was removed and that damage was repaired, and after 3 rides, the hull repair doesn't appear to be leaking at all, but the through-hull fitting and updated carbon ring parts do look to be leaking. When the ski was reassembled after the cracks in hull were repaired, the updated carbon ring parts were put in. What I found when I was compressing the bellows to put the driveshaft circlip in was that you had to put excessive force on the bellows and the through-hull fitting to install the circlip. The ski previously had a rope get wrapped around the driveshaft, so there was a little distortion to the driveshaft opening of the through-hull fitting. After performing the water leak test, I found the through-hull fitting leaking for sure, so stick around because I'm going to show you all the steps it took to get that replaced. This is the through-hull fitting I'm installing, the part number the one I used, and the following are pictures showing all angles of the fitting. Check my description and products on the video for all the products and tools I use and recommend. If you use the links supplied, it does help us continue to bring you free helpful how-to videos so you can do some of these repairs yourself. When I picked up the fitting, I found it had a casting glob that looked like it would prevent it from seating against the hull properly, so I used a file to smooth it out. Here's how it looked when I was done with it. The first thing you should do before removing your jet pump is to remove the driveshaft circlip. It is easier to access if you remove the supercharger and dislodge a water box, but I'm just trying to show you guys another method I use to get it out. Now the circlip is as exposed as it's going to get. It's right past the tool, and if you look closely, you can see the updated bellows is completely compressed. There is really only enough room to get a pick in there to get the circlip out. The amount of force needed to get the bellows compressed is rather excessive, and that obviously puts a lot of stress on the through-hull fitting itself. What I found was the most successful to get the circlip out, especially with the supercharger in the way, and the fact that you only get about 3 millimeters of access to it, is a 90-degree pick. I tried the pocket screwdriver, but with the supercharger installed, it just didn't get the right angle needed, so the 90-degree pick worked perfectly. Typically the circlip drops straight down, but if you lose it and you're replacing your carbon ring assembly, don't worry, it normally comes with a new one. At this point, like I said, I had already sealed this area to try to reinforce it and keep water from coming in, but it looks as though it's leaking from the front section under here where the bellows are. So I'm going to have to get the whole pump out, and now that the circlip is out, I should be able to get the driveshaft and bellows out after that. The through-hull fitting that's in the ski now is partially damaged where the driveshaft goes through it, but there's not a hole in it. When I get the old fitting out, I'm going to be looking for a sealant problem at the front edge of it, and that's what I'm going to be solving when I put the replacement one in. When I get this new fitting installed, I'm going to be sure to cover the whole perimeter of the fitting with sealant so there's no chance of leaks from it. Now let's get started. I'm going to start from the inside and go ahead with removing the IBR support bracket. It's just 3 bolts and a tie strap to get it out. Really the next step is I'm going to need to get the pump off the back. Obviously the reverse gate, the nozzle, and then start pulling the pump, and then the drive shaft, and then I can pull the carbon ring setup, the updated carbon ring setup that's on here now, off. So I'm going to need to get the intake grate off also, but before you mess with the pump removal, it's a really good idea to put your reverse bucket in the upright position. In order to get your jet pump ready for removal, start by putting your IBR system in override mode. On this model, first you hold the reverse lever down, install the key, push the start button to wake up the ski, then follow the on-screen instructions. Typically you push the mode button to enter IBR override, and then you can push and hold the up button until you hear the motor stop moving. That puts the reverse gate in the best position to disassemble the pump. The first thing you do when removing the pump is disconnect the steering cable so the nozzle will move freely. Next, you need to remove the jet pump nozzle 13mm mounting bolts. If you can't pivot the nozzle and remove it after that, you can now access and remove the reverse bucket 13mm bolts, and you can also remove the IBR actuator arm bolt. When you remove the pump nozzle and reverse bucket, make sure you don't lose the plastic pivot bushings in either one of them. When the nozzle and reverse bucket are out of the way, that gives you full access to get the pump out. Remove all 4 13mm mount nuts and try to retrieve all 4 thick washers so they don't fall and get lost when you pull the pump out. Now, as long as your pump, impeller, and driveshaft splines still have grease on them, you should be able to pull your pump out without any issues. If the freshwater inlet seal or mechanical bilge siphon seals come out with the pump, just put them back up on the hull or put them in a safe place for reassembly. Now you should be able to wiggle and pull your driveshaft out from the back. You may find it easier to get the best leverage if you chock your trailer securely and wipe the grease off the splines so you can get the best grip on it. Make sure your driveshaft bumper is still intact. If it's not, you need to retrieve it from the PTO coupler. If you have any trouble pulling the driveshaft out, you can try spraying the area behind the chrome metal hat with WD-40 and having a second person try to spin the metal hat while you're pulling the driveshaft out. Alright guys, now that the pump and driveshaft are out, I can now remove the carbon ring and bellows assembly. The bellows needs to be removed so I can get all 4 through-hole fitting mounting bolts out with reinforcing brackets. This is actually the updated bellows assembly. And I can show you the difference in what the updated design looks like and the original design. I won't knock anything out of the way here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here are the two. So this is the updated design, and this is the older design. If you can see the difference in those two. So there's a hood on this one that actually kind of gives the allows water to stay in here, rather than on this one it'll sling it out inside the hole and make it a little bit obvious to find the actual leak. But at this point you can see there's some water in there too. So just gonna get this stuff out of the way. Now you have full access to get the through-hole fitting mounting bolts out with brackets. Once you get them out, it is a good idea to clean off the excess sealant on the bolts and brackets to have them ready for reassembly. The reinforcing brackets have one elongated hole in each. It doesn't really matter which way they are reinstalled. Since I attempted to reseal the perimeter of the fitting with 5200 permanent sealant, I'm going to have to use a razor knife to cut away that sealant just so I can get to the 5900 sealant. With the bellows being in the way, I was only able to get to the top and sides on the inside and the perimeter of the fitting through the intake grate. In order to make it easier to get the fitting out, I scored the gap opening on the outside and cut away as much sealant as I could from the inside with a razor knife. These are the materials I used to do the through-hole fitting replacement. The heat gun was needed to soften the adhesive, the plastic chisels, scraper, and screwdriver were used to pry the fitting out of the hole, and the wire brushes, brake clean, and Scotch-Brite were used to clean the old adhesive off the hole. The only thing that's not shown is a 90-degree pick I used to break the stretched adhesive and a razor blade to help knife away large clumps of sealant. There really wasn't enough access to get to the through-hole fitting through the pump opening, so removing the intake grate allowed a lot more access. I started using a couple of screwdrivers to pry the fitting down, but realized very quickly that heat was going to be needed to soften the adhesive. When I was using the heat gun, I tried to keep the nozzle pointed at the fitting and the sealant only, just so the whole material stayed rigid. If you can heat and pry down at the same time, that will help you break the bond on the sealant quicker. This is not something you want to rush because the sealant needs to stretch with the heat before you can get it to break free. Now that I've made some progress on the outside, I'm going to move to the top side so I can get better access to pry the rear portion away from the hull with heat. Alright guys, there it is. Finally get it to break away. I don't want it to fall on the floor immediately right now, but the key to it was going around the whole area, mainly the through-hole fitting itself, trying to stay on the through-hole fitting, not really the hull, and actually heating it up, getting it nice and warm, using a pry bar. Just trying to be very careful. Pretty much prying right here, using that as a pry point, or this point right here, to push against because it was raised. So I went at an angle, or not at an angle, I went like this, started prying down, and as I was doing that, I ended up using a pick to go around the edge to catch the other sealant along this edge right here and to break it away, kind of like the spider effect, I guess you'd say, where it's kind of like the sealant's kind of stretching, trying to kind of catching the sealant and just breaking it away at this angle, just like that. I went around with the pick, and then the last one I kind of went over on this side get this out of the way. Like I said, as I was prying it, after I heated it, then I went around this side, and it caught the last little bit of sealant and just kind of broke that away. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and get under there and get it out, and I'll show you what it looks like compared to the new one, which obviously has no sealant on it. All right, guys, here's the old fitting, old Thru-Hull fitting right here. All I can tell is that it looks like maybe around in this area here that it may not have gotten enough sealant in there. There is some still on the body, but it looks like it might have broken away at some point, maybe from the impact. This particular Thru-Hull fitting actually did get a rope wrapped around it, or I guess you say around the drive shaft, and see that distortion there where at one point something happened to it. So that could have caused the damage or the separation, the glue separation. But and so pretty much where it was separated was right up here, or where it was leaking was actually right in this area. So I had actually resealed all around here, all around back here, all the way around down here. And since the bellows was in place, I really couldn't seal down here. So this is where it actually ultimately was leaking. So if you do get something wrapped around your drive shaft, and it does kind of catch on the inside of the Thru-Hull fitting, there's a very good chance that you're probably going to have the same kind of an issue with this. This is the old fitting, and the sealant that stuck to it is the 5200 that didn't quite work for the resealing. I'm not saying it won't work, but if you're going to do the job right, you really need to be using what Seadoo recommends, and that is Loctite SI5900. The SI5900 had a thicker consistency compared to the 5200, so it will likely hold its form better. The next step is to clean all the old sealant off the hull and the hardware so the new fitting can be installed. I'm going to get started on that next. As you can see, the 5200 bonded rather well to the fitting, which is going to make cleanup difficult, but you need the whole surface to be clean of excess sealant and roughed up so the new sealant will bond well. This is the hardware for the Thru-Hull fitting and for the intake grate. It is important to get the old sealant off the screws so the new sealant has a place to go and so the screws don't crack or strip the bolt holes in the new fitting. The screws are going to be the mechanical bond that will hold the fitting in place while the sealant is curing. The thread locker should be cleaned off the intake grate bolts just so the bolts thread back in properly. The front bolt needs sealant on both washers because it is a Thru-Hull bolt and that will prevent water leaking in. I'm not really going to show cleaning the sealant off the hull because it's pretty straightforward. You just use a razor blade to cut away large clumps and use a wire brush with brake clean to scrub the remaining off. In this step, I decided to tape the new fitting into the hull so I can make guideline marks to know where sealant needs to be applied to get proper squeeze out. I'm using a silver permanent marker so the marks are easy to follow when applying the sealant. When you apply the sealant, you're going to want to cover the whole perimeter of the fitting up to the marks, but also surrounding the screw bolt holes because they are Thru-Hull openings. Since the fitting was more prone to leaking at the front edge, I'm going to be sure to cover that area as much as possible. Here's a good look at how clean you want to get the hull with wire brushes and brake clean before you install the new fitting. The more roughed up and clean it is will help the new sealant bond properly. This is the sealant that Seadoo recommends you use to install the Thru-Hull fitting. Since it has a short shelf life, especially when opened, you want to have everything you need it for ready to assemble. I cut the tip of the nozzle pretty broad because the sealant is rather thick and I want to be sure to apply it heavily around the whole fitting. Use the original fitting and the silver marks I made as a guide and be sure to fill in the gaps in between the bolts and the area around the bolts. I'm going to start at the front area just because I feel that is the most important area to get covered well because it's also the lowest point in the ski. You can always wipe off the excess and squeeze out later, but you just need to be sure you cover the fitting well. Now that I have the fitting covered with a sufficient amount of sealant, I'm going to get it installed. I have a couple of pieces of masking tape already under the ski to help hold the fitting in place so it gives me enough time to get to the top side to install the brackets and bolts. I'm going to show you the top side view while I'm installing it. I decided to start from the front to get the best lineup, then slowly applied light pressure and was able to see visible squeeze out all the way around. The sealant was doing a great job holding the fitting in place, so I only needed one piece of masking tape to help hold it up till I got topside. Before you install the top brackets and bolts, take a few seconds to shape the squeeze out and get the excess sealant out of the bolt holes. I ended up with an excessive amount of squeeze out on the front section, so in order to be sure it didn't obstruct the installation of the bellows, I pushed some of the excess towards the sides of the fitting. Putting a rag on the end of a pocket screwdriver helped to get the excess sealant out of the bolt holes. In order to keep the fitting from falling down, I'm holding it up with my fingers while I clean and shape the excess sealant. As soon as you have 2 bolt holes cleared of excess sealant, it is wise to put them in to hold the fitting up. Before the fitting was installed in the ski, I ran the bolts into the new fitting so they would start threading easier. Both brackets have elongated holes in them, so there won't be any issues with bolts lining up when putting them in. Just remember, when tightening the bolts, that they are threading into plastic. Be careful not to over-tighten them. Snug and tight is good enough. Using the tip of the rag on the screwdriver made the difference to get the excess squeeze out of the bolt holes. I'm using one of my favorite tools, the Titan Micro 1/4 inch ratchet, to prevent putting too much torque on the bolts. It's nice and compact, so it works great. You can use brake clean or WD-40 to clean off the excess to make the install look cleaner, but just make sure you don't wipe away the sealant needed to keep it watertight. It doesn't really matter if you have too much squeeze out on the sides and the top, but in order for the bellows to fit onto the round flange, you need to be sure there is not too thick of squeeze out under the round opening. Once I tightened the bolts, I got a good bit more squeeze out in the bellows area, so this is where I wiped some of the excess towards the right and left sides of the opening. I decided to add a little bit more sealant to both sides of the fitting to be sure and strengthen the bond of the hull. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, now is the perfect time to do so. I have a lot more videos to come. I appreciate your support. When you're done applying the last bit of sealant to fill in all the gaps, you can apply brake clean or WD-40 to a rag and clean up the excess around the fitting. I finished up the cleanup and shaping of the sealant, but also applied a little extra to spots around the fitting where I saw stress cracks. Now the bolts are fully tightened up, and I have evened out the sealant all around the fitting on the top side and the bottom side. One last thing that I found that is important is to test fit your old bellows or your replacement bellows to be sure there is not too much sealant under the bellows to prevent it from seating properly. Just put it on the fitting and spin it around to see if you catch any sealant on the bellows. If the bellows stays clean, then you're good to go. It is wise to give the sealant a full 24 hours of cure time before reassembling the ski, but I am personally going to give it 2 full days of cure time just to be sure. Now is the perfect time to check and verify your engine alignment is good. Since the engine alignment plate is typically drilled for M10 studs, it is best to use O-rings to help the plate align properly on the M8 studs on this ski. This is how the plate should look when properly aligned on the studs and alignment dowels. If you don't have the alignment tool, you should have someone set up your ski and verify your alignment is good before you reinstall your carbon ring, drive shaft, and pump. As you can see, this one was off enough to need shims to bring it up. Once you've allowed a sufficient amount of cure time for the sealant and you have your engine line to the pump, the next step is reassembling everything. Here is one last look at how the fitting should be sealed before putting everything back together. Since the 5200 that was previously installed on the old fitting had peeled away, I tried to prevent putting too much on the outside and the pump tunnel. I used brake clean to clean up the excess, and I decided to go over the transom plate gaps just to make sure everything was sealed well. The hardest part of this job, I would say, was getting the old fitting out without damaging the hull. Cleanup was time consuming, and sealing up the new fitting was tedious, but if you follow my recommendations and this video, you should be able to do this yourself. I decided to put the original bellows with new carbon ring back in just to see how it would perform. Here is the final leak check that I did to see if the fitting install was successful, and it was. There was nothing leaking under the fitting after the repair. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Please smash the like button to support us and subscribe to my channel to see more cool videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.